So I've always believed if the numbers are there, then that basically gives you your answer, right? If the women's team is generating the numbers, not just in terms of viewership, but definitely that viewership is converting to money, ticket sales, they have merchandise sales, they have their individual deals. It's very clear that they are dominating the sport. Then, of course, they have to be rewarded with the money.
But like any conversation and like any subject, it's not as straightforward as it might seem.
The women's team, they're head and shoulders above all the other women's teams across the globe.
It's absolutely superb for the women's soccer team of United States to have maintained their standards in spite of, fighting with the federation. Like World Cup winners suing a federation. If you are playing those many more ATP or WTA events, that's where the equal pay should be focused. Again, the difficulty arises because it's an individual sport.
But the best thing about the 100, it's equal pay. Trying to avoid any sort of controversy here, but anyway.
We need the controversy.
But this is what I read, and I think I read well enough. The moment
Go
I
with
say
my philosophy, bro. Always change up the answer. You may not get the points, but your
Four.
pride is maintained.
4.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode of All About Sports, the podcast, a podcast by the fans, for the fans. Before we go into this week's episode, a quick reminder of last week's episode. We spoke with Eugene Campbell III. He's a professional basketball player currently playing at Wnba Rockwork in Portugal, but he's played actually across Europe. He's played in Moldova, he's played in Armenia. We learned a little bit about his story, his experience playing across Europe, starting off in actually New Jersey before moving there. So really interesting story, really wonderful to kind of learn about basketball, outside of the NBA as well. So do check that out. With that, let's get into this week's episode. We had some big news this week as the US women's team actually won a court case against the United States Soccer Federation, in which they won a $24 million settlement, 22 million of which will go to the players behind the actual lawsuit. Just as a reminder to all our viewers of what exactly the lawsuit was about, the US women's team, the women's national soccer team, believed for a long time that they were actually garnering as much attention and viewership as the US men's team. For those of you who follow soccer, you'll note that football, you'll note that the US women's team is one of the most successful teams sort of across sports. They've absolutely dominated. They've won the last 2 World Cups at the very least. I believe the third last one, they reached the finals. They're a phenomenally successful, by far the most successful women's team. The US men's team, on the other hand, failed to actually qualify for the 2018 World Cup. So while there is maybe a difference in the viewership levels that exist for men's and women's football, winning the Women's World Cup versus not qualifying for the 2018 World Cup probably has a different impact on the viewership. But like any conversation and like any subject, it's not as straightforward as it might seem. One thing that we do want to call out as a caveat is that the women's soccer team does actually receive a little bit more in benefits than other teams. So it's a little bit more complicated than just a straightforward, like less in salary. And they did choose a slightly different structure where women actually earn a base salary of 100,000 plus performance-based incentives. The men, on the other hand, earn exclusively bonuses in lieu of an actual salary. So if you don't make the team, you don't make anything, whereas women almost have a guaranteed compensation. So there is a little bit of difference. Their argument was, though, if they played a set of 26 games and won all 20, played a set of 20 games and won all 20 games, their compensation would be significantly lower than the men. So it's always complicated. Maz, I'll go to you first with this one. What do you think about this news? It's interesting because there are some very interesting numbers, and I think it's just a bit of a call out to the fact that while in general, maybe, one sport might earn more, it's always helpful to understand within a specific context who's actually generating more. But what are your thoughts, Maz?
I mean, it's simple. According to me, you reap the rewards you earn. And the women's team, by far, they're head and shoulders above all the other women's teams across the globe. There's literally no comparison that can be drawn. American football players are just at a different level altogether, and I think they are getting what they deserve. Like you mentioned, the US team failed to qualify for the 2018 World Cup. Yes, they are on course to qualify for this one, but but still they still managed to lose to Canada during the qualifiers right now as well, which clearly says that it's not as clear cut for the men's circuit when it comes to football, even though they have the likes of Serginho Dest, Weston McKennie, obviously Pulisic, so on and so forth. With that entire naturalization of players and all of that, the US men's team is still failing to even come on top in the Americas at the moment. Shows just why the women must have been even more frustrated, right? It's like you've Captain America, as Pulisic is called, plays for the world champions right now in Chelsea, this, that, all that rubbish. At the end of the day, I enjoy watching US women's football way more than watching the men's play, for sure. I don't watch the men play at all, let's face it. But like if I'm watching women's football, it's probably going to be the Manchester United women's team, or then it's going to be the US women's team. So, and that is someone who literally like has no inclination to watch US football, right? US soccer and the US team play. It's just because they actually are a joy to watch. They play proper football. They would whoop our asses, even if they were blindfolded. Even and that's how good they are, according to me. So it just comes back to that, according to me. And this is where one of those rare cases where I would align with Shubham's ideologies behind it. If you generate the revenue, you generate the viewership, you deserve to earn that much. And we'll get into the other sports later as well. But according to me, truly deserved. It's sad that it had to reach that stage, though. It should have never have come to that. Why did they have to struggle so much to get to this point? Because, I mean, it's clear that it's not only the case of performance, right? In their case, the viewership is there, the fan following is there, the merchandising is there, the sales are there, sponsorships come in. Nike has such huge deals with so many of these American soccer players. It just never made sense to me. And it's disgraceful from the US Soccer Federation's point of view that they didn't do something about this on their own proactively, and they sat on their laurels. That's my problem with it.
No, I just had one question because Krishnan, you mentioned that the US women's team, all the players playing there, they get a base salary of $100,000 and the men's don't. So just out of curiosity, is there any specific reason to that? Why?
So it just comes down to the collective bargaining agreement. So both players' unions just negotiated for different things. The men's team sort of negotiated for more of a incentive-based structure. It probably also has to do more with the fact that their earnings from other teams is probably pretty decent if they're playing in the MLS, or now we know the Pulisic's and Dests are playing in the Premier League.
In fact, that was my second question. That the men's, they obviously play in the MLS. Is there also like a women's division or something like that? Is there, or they just play national football?
No, there's NWSL. So there's an equivalent in. So there's obviously England, but in the US there's the NWSL. But again, the amount of salary you're getting is very negligible. I think it's in like the average is somewhere close to 40,000. It's not super high in the NWSL. So I think that's
so this battle. Well, battle might not be the right word, but this basic discussion has only been in relation to the national team, nothing to do with the MLS or the NWLS, like you mentioned, right? So this is only the national team.
Correct. Entirely the national team. And so that, but you are correct in the sense that the reason they negotiated slightly different structures is likely because of the league structure and the club structure.
Yeah, they're already making good money, so yeah.
Exactly. So national earnings for the US women's team makes up a lot more of their purse than for the US men's team. Definitely for a Pulisic, Dest, Gio Reyna, for those guys. And that's also a big reason why the US men's team, I think, actually supported this. It's because frankly, they potentially might drop their, well, this is just bringing the women's up. It's not necessarily bringing the men's down, A. And B, club earnings is still probably makes up a lot more for them in general.
So, yeah.
And just going to that revenue generation point, I wanted to quickly hit on that because as exactly like you said, in 2016, women's games actually generated 1.9 million more in revenue than men's games. And from 2016 to 2018, women earned 50.8 million, whereas men's games earned 49.9 million. So it's slightly higher, but the fact that it's slightly higher and the compensation was significantly lower is definitely problematic. The one thing though I do want to call out is this only talks about ticket sales. The sponsorships, the way that the US Soccer Federation sells sponsorships is they sell sponsorships collectively. So they sell it collectively for the US men's and women's team, which in this case, a lot of people say might actually disadvantage the women because there's a lot more positive marketing that you're getting from the women's team currently because of their success. And there is a belief that actually the sponsorships are more wanted to cover the women's side than it is the men's side. But there isn't data on that. So we're not exactly sure what the sponsorship difference is, which obviously plays a big role. But Malu, we know you're the numbers guy. So what is sort of your reaction to some of these numbers? Because I'll be honest, I was a little bit surprised, to be very honest with you.
So I've always believed if the numbers are there, then that basically gives you your answer, right? So if the women's team is generating the numbers, not just in terms of viewership, but definitely that viewership is converting to money. They have ticket sales, they have merchandise sales. All the athletes are also individually having big followings. So obviously, when individual athletes have big followings, as a collective, obviously, I would imagine their following would be much larger. They have their individual deals, and like Mazhar mentioned, now they have an exclusive deal with Nike. So if all of that is in place, obviously there is something that they're doing correctly. It's very clear that they are dominating the sport. And if they are dominating their sport, then of course they have to be rewarded with the money. One thing that you said I find very interesting is how the US Federation collectively sells their sponsors, sponsorship rights, I mean. So I think, now, again, like you said, there's no data, but I feel this might be a situation where maybe the women's team is hard done, right? Because maybe there are certain brands who would only like to sponsor the women's football. And perhaps if they were sold separately, the women's team would get a lot more money. And with that lot more money, they would in return get a higher remuneration. So it's actually very interesting if there would be any data available in terms of how much only the men's could generate or how much the women's could generate. But in terms of whatever this decision has been passed, considering how Mazhar spoke highly of the women's team and what their achievements are, I don't follow it much. But clearly, if they are there, then I think amazing for them. Yeah, they deserve it.
That's a good point, Malu, also because it does hit on an interesting point, which I think we always talk about, and this goes back to the same point of there's an assumption consistently that women's sports just earn less. And I think in a lot of cases, that is just the fact. And I'm not saying it's fair or unfair, but the viewership is just not there, unfortunately. But this was a really good call out that I think the federation was just sort of resting on their laurels and kind of saying like, yeah, maybe we can make that argument. But when the financials were audited, there was a realization that, holy shit, we should have checked this. Like, we just assume that's the case. It's not necessarily the case in all situations. So it is a kind of a unique scenario. Gui, I'll go to you.
Sorry, before Gui comes in, I just want to add one thing that I think collectively selling sponsorship, this I'm just thinking on the top of my head, I think it's brilliant when there's massive disparity between the men's game and the women's game. So for example, like in India, if we take, I don't know, like take hockey, for example. Now this I'm just making up. I really don't know how the men's are versus the women's. But if the men's are very good and the women's aren't very good, and if the rights are sold collectively, this can really help the underperforming division to boost up and come up. But in this case, where the rights are being sold and the women's are better, but they are being underpaid than the men's. So this is like obviously very sad. But I think collectively selling rights can really boost up one division which is not performing well. So I can see that side also. But obviously in the US's case, it's more detrimental for the women. So yeah.
Just to add to what you said, Shubham, India does it right with the BCCI as well with women's cricket. So there is a disparity clearly in terms of viewership and even earnings for that matter. But the sponsorship rights are the same and everything goes collectively. So that is how the BCCI works out their contracts, and it works because it's really boosted the women's game in India, and we're seeing some superstars up and coming. Grassroots is getting better for female cricket. So yeah, you're right. It again, it's subjective, and I think it works when there is that disparity. But it's just like a very different scenario to see the females earning more already and then no one realizing that and then just not even bothering. It's just so odd.
More surprising for it to happen in the United States, which generally is, they do the best marketing plays, right? You see someone doing well, okay, pick them up, make them a bigger star than anyone else, and yet there is a 6 year lawsuit, but which is on the backs of World Cup winners, like World Cup winners suing a federation. And I'm probably the one who hates the federation versus players antics the most, right? We've seen some really entertaining teams kind of shot to dust. Like West Indies cricket is one of them, right? Because they fight so often with the federation. You missed years of crazy cricket, to be honest, from them. Uh, and it's really detrimental, and you know it's absolutely superb for the women's soccer team of United States to have maintained their standards in spite of fighting with the federation they are under, which is like kudos to them for that.
And what's confusing about this, Malu, exactly to your point, is I completely agree with you. It's helpful to use the marketing power of one group to kind of help develop the other group. I think what was confusing for them is they were earning more, but they oftentimes their training facilities would be non-grass as compared to male players being training on grass. The men fly charter while they typically fly commercial. The ticket prices for the women's national games are lower, and there was a claim that the marketing efforts were also lower. So it was kind of confusing to them, where it's like, we're exactly to your point, we're making more, but it's not, we're also just getting a worse situation. It's almost as if, if Indian cricket was funding women's cricket, which to some extent it does do men's cricket, and then suddenly they asked Virat Kohli and Rohit Sharma not to start flying commercial and to not fly private and fly commercial, but the women's team could fly, private. It would be a very confusing dynamic. So I think it's a great point. It's a weird dynamic when one group is earning more but getting less, which you called out right at the start. So Gui, I'm going to hand it back to you actually, because I wanted to kind of dive into some of the transition points into other sports, right? Because it's an interesting call out and interesting to see how translatable it is to other sports. And I want to talk a sport that obviously at the back of your hand, tennis. Tennis is actually a sport that does pretty decently when it comes to the gender pay gap. There was a study that was done on the average earnings of across sports between male and female, and tennis is actually one of the highest. So, Gui, can you talk a little bit about what tennis has done to sort of bring that gap closer? And are there cases where viewership and revenue generation, similar to the US women's soccer team, are actually similar, where you can do something like what the US women's team has done?
So, the point in tennis to be made is that it's an individual sport, right? So the way you bargain becomes like completely different, and to apply the same standards as you would do it to a team sport and apply the same standards to tennis is kind of difficult to do, considering each player brings a set of things which the crowd may or may not enjoy. Anyway, coming to the point, the Grand Slams do very well in terms of paying both men and women equally. Coming down, now here's the issue, right? There are 4 Grand Slams which run across 2 weeks. If you make it past round, if you make it to the main draw, yes, you are earning well, even for just playing your round 1 match. But the issue is that there's round 1, 2, 3, 4, quarters, semis, and the finals. That's 7 games every Grand Slam, right? If you play all 28 of those games, which is extremely unlikely, unless you are Federer or Rafa at their peak, or maybe Djokovic in the last few years. I don't think Serena's managed it. I don't think anyone must have managed to play all 28, right? Fed was not playing the French. Okay. Rafa would have faltered in one slam, typically the Australian. But so here's the point. You have only 28 games where, men and women get paid equally. But now come down to the ATP or the WTA events. Those are the events which, like, why do you hear that 65 ATP events have been won by, that's the number, right? 65 or 68 for Djokovic and Nadal. That's where they're at. Those many career titles. If you are playing those many more ATP or WTA events, that's where the equal pay should be focused also, right? if the larger number of games are played outside of the slams, there has to be equal pay in those as well. Again, the difficulty arises because it's an individual sport. Ash Bhatti playing Serena in round one is going to get more viewership. It's going to be put on the center court. It's going to be put on the main court of any WTA event, if there is more than one court in those events. But as opposed to, some 100 seed playing, or even if you're outside of the top 10, you don't get to play there, right? Even if you're in the men's draw, if Serena's playing. Which comes down to the point that yes, viewership is that good for a certain player, but how do you then equate that for the entire lot of players playing in the slam, which is why it's really difficult. And I mean, of course, the slams having made it equal is great, but yes, the WTA and ATP events also need to work on this aspect, because it will really help in terms of pushing, because most players don't play the slams. you have to even Emma Raducanu, who won, played the qualifiers, right? So that's the point. Like, you have to play the qualifiers, even if you're like outside the top, how many, 50, 60, you have to play the qualifiers. There's very little chance, or you have a wild card because of your past laurels. But yeah, it's a little difficult in tennis to apply what has just happened in women's soccer.
I just thought of one thing. Obviously, I'll share with you guys and you'll tell me your thoughts on it. So when Gui was talking about how it is difficult to apply in tennis, so you guys might be aware about like how La Liga, they sell their TV rights. The TV rights is not sold as a league. It is like each team can negotiate their individual TV rights. So obviously Real Madrid, Barcelona, they make a lot of money. And obviously in a collective sport, it becomes very difficult to compete because one club is getting, for example, 100 million, one is getting 10 million. There's a huge gap. So I think in a sport like tennis, which is an individual sport, to get pay equality, I think what they can do is for every round, they can just have a base pay. Obviously, now this you have to keep in mind in terms of the numbers, viewership, a little bit you have to keep in mind. You can't just have a base pay, but sort of like have a base salary sort of a structure. And then after that, individual players can negotiate their deals based on their popularity, the amount of money they generate for the ATP. So for example, like say if there's a Roger Federer playing against some upcoming player, any upcoming player in round one, say both of them have a equal salary of $3,000, and then Roger Federer can have an individual contract saying that these many rounds I win, this is the amount of money I'm generating for the event, so this should be my bonuses. And the other player can have his individual contracts. So like this, what can happen is it becomes merit based. If a player through his performances climbs up this ladder, gets to rank number 1, 2, 3, or rank number 10, starts winning tournaments, then he's getting the bonus that he deserves based on his merit, and he's getting a base salary. This can be applied to the women's and men's games. So then there won't be a question of pay disparity, right? Then you're just getting paid based on what you deserve and what your skill set is.
So my only thing with Malu is I generally think, barring the conversation you can have of ATP and ATP tournaments, I actually think tennis pay is okay. Like, I don't think there's anything fundamentally wrong with it. So I don't think anything has to change.
No, the reason I brought this up is because how Gui mentioned there are only 4 Grand Slams, but like 60, 65 ATP tournaments. And if those 60, 65 ATP tournaments is where the major disparity is what I derive from Gui's conversation, then those 4 Grand Slams really don't make up for anything, right? So that's where the focus should be. And that's where I just thought maybe, like, this is just for the sake of conversation, right? Just coming up with ideas. Like, so yeah, just your thoughts on it, really.
So I think it's very creative, because I honestly didn't think of that. My call out to that is, I think what tennis is doing is actually similar to the example that you gave earlier, which is one using the big 4 to fund the rest. So the issue with the situation where like Roger Federer or Nadal or whoever can negotiate their rate is they would get a really good rate versus, let's say, Tsitsipas, for example. What tennis is trying to do is use the name of Roger Federer and Nadal and etc. to pay the Dimitrov and Zverevs and all the smaller names more. The issue with the structure in which you can each negotiate will mean that the Nadal and Roger, etc., will make more and more. And maybe if Zverev and Medvedev, let's say, get better and better, they'll eventually start to make more. But if you're this one-off winner, let's say like an MR Raducanu who comes out of nowhere, maybe your earnings won't be as much because more funding will still be diverted to maybe a Naomi Osaka. So that's the only reason I think they might be opposed to it. Is very honestly, tennis is sort of riding on the backs of the Serena Williams, Naomi Osaka.
Of course.
And they're using it to fund the others, which I think, I don't know if I like, I don't mind it, only because I think those big names earn so much just from their sponsorships that winnings are obviously very relevant to Nadal and Federer. And so Nadal, Federer, Djokovic, what they earn from the Grand Slams is more the pride of winning the Grand Slams. The financial winning from the Grand Slams isn't as big a deal for them.
Nothing compared to their sponsorship money, right?
Exactly. But to a Zverev or a Tsitsipas, it's actually huge. It's actually a decent amount. It's not, I'm not saying the bulk, but it means a lot more to them, which is why I'm okay with the current structure. But I don't know. I don't know, Maz, Gui, what your thoughts are. It is an interesting point, though, to solve the issue at the ATP level.
So at the ATP 1000 versus the ATP 1000 events pay handsomely, all right? ATP 500 event has, I think, the Rio Open. I'm just looking right now for 2022. The prize money is 111,000, all right?
For men's and women?
Good question. Okay, a WTA 1000 event. WTA is the women's one, all right? The 2021 winner got $370,000. All right. Now let me go to another ATP 1000 event, which should be round about the same, because the 1000 events are the ones where all the popular players play, and then you dial down to the 500s and the 250s, which are kind of difficult to watch also. Okay, here it is. The ATP 1000 event. Prize money for doubles, 414,000.
Men's.
Singles is men's. The winner is close to $1 million.
And women's is 370,000, what you said. I see, that's 3 times, dude.
This is just random fact check. May or may not be correct, but but this is what I read, and I think I read well enough to appropriately write that piece of information.
And I would suspect that WTA pay is maybe lower. I mean, the truth is the Grand Slams made a conscious decision to keep it equal, despite, I think, viewership potentially being inconsistent. So Mazal, let me actually go to you with that, because I think tennis is a bit confusing. It's hard to say how good viewership is, or is it comparable or not, because we've lived in this era of the big four, right? So viewership just seems to be higher for men's, but it's confusing to say if you take them out, if that would be the case. Because if we always had Naomi Osaka and Serena Williams in the finals, would women keep up? So I don't know what your thoughts are on viewership when you compare those two.
I think they can. We actually had a talk from the US Open tournament director. So she's basically the managing director for the USTA. And what she said, through whatever surveys they ran, and obviously through just gate entries and for the US Open, there are more women than men when it comes to viewership in spectators in the grandstands. Not only center court. I'm not talking about only Louis Armstrong and the Arthur Ashe. I'm talking about all the courts in general. The tournament saw more female viewers than male. So I think that's the perfect sort of example to use. That I think you're right, Krishnan. If it's a Serena versus Osaka, they might get more viewership than maybe a Medvedev versus Tsitsipas. So
one thing, Mazhar, when you say more female viewers, you mean more viewers for the female circle, or you mean more female fans?
No, just female fans in general, and which
So
is also
female fans
surprising.
are watching men's games or women's games?
Both, basically in general. So what they noticed was the courts were not only full when it was male tennis players playing, they were full for the females as well. And in fact, obviously, like you mentioned, Radhikanu and Coco made it. That was their highest viewership. So then we went on to ask her, is female viewership more than the men's circuit? She said, yes, it is. And this is, we're talking about the US, literally the USTA head saying that it was more for the female circuit that time around because there was no one else. It was only the Djokovic games that probably saw higher viewership. So I think that's a lot to go by and speaks volumes of how different tennis is in terms of viewership when it comes to female versus male. But I'm not surprised by that because, like Gui said, I think individual sports are very different than team sports. Here you are like sort of rooting for a personality, right? So it's much more different than when it comes to team sports in general. Also, it's like leveling the playing field in a sort of way. Like tennis is spectacular to watch regardless, but watching less quality of football is not as attractive as watching top quality tennis. Like I said, right, the US women's team is so good that you would get bored watching them play another team because they will most likely hammer them.
So then what's the fun in the
16-0
competition or something? I remember there was a Thailand game at the start of one of the World Cups and it was some ridiculous score.
So that's why I just think it comes down to that. Like team sports are just so much harder to watch if one team's just too strong. And you can tell me, oh, the charm of the FA Cup and all that BS, but that barely ever happens, especially not at the international level when you're talking about countries going against each other. So makes a massive difference for sure. And we've seen it again. I think what makes female tennis more exciting is the fact that it's 3 sets because there's less time to come back. Like Rafa would have been knocked out if he played 3 sets, right? He wouldn't have been Grand Slam champion at the end of the day. So I think all of these things factor into it. The spectacle, people keep talking about pay and all of that, but people forget the spectacle as well. It plays a big factor into viewership, which drives money at the end of the day. I would rather pay and watch Osaka versus Serena or Osaka versus Barty or something rather than watch Tsitsipas versus Thiem.
No, I think a lot of viewers might make a similar decision. What's interesting is, and in ATP and WTA tournaments, it's all 3 sets, right? So it's not like there's less like advertising time or anything like that. Like in Grand Slams, you can maybe make that argument. Like there's just less time, so there's less advertising, so you earn less. In WTA and ATP, it's about the same.
Yeah, that's why it's even crazier, right? Because it's 3 sets in both cases, and the men's circuit 1 million compared to 370,000 is unacceptable in a lot of ways.
So Maz, I actually want to call out to the point that you spoke about what the US Open director spoke about. At the US Open, the women's final actually drew more television viewers than the men every year from 2010 to 2014. I don't have data post that. But again, in 2021, the game between Emma Raducanu and Leila Fernandez, averaged 2.44 million viewers, which was more than the Daniel Medvedev Novak Djokovic final, which had Djokovic in it. So there are definitely instances where they do exceed. On the flip side, I did get a little bit on the viewership in ATP tournaments. So apparently, the men's ATP World Tour events have generated larger audiences and revenue than the women's WTA Tour. According to statistics that BBC compiled, the ATP drew 973 million viewers in 2015 for the men's ATP tournaments versus 395 million for the women's circuit. So maybe that's kind of what's contributing to the pay. Maybe at the Grand Slam level, viewership is relatively equal, but maybe it's dropping off at the ATP and WTA circuit. But
Krishnan, again, this you're forgetting that time Rafa, Federer would have been playing a lot of these ATP tournaments as well. So I think that also has to be factored in. Yeah, it's still a massive disparity, and I'm not saying it's going to get closer. And it's sort of, you're right, it might be justifying that. But again, we don't know how much of that is driven by, again, like Shubham said, Rafa and Fed and Djokovic.
It goes to the same, I think that the call out for tennis in general is individual brand name means so much. that when you just pull out one brand name, remove, take the impact that I think single-handedly Serena Williams has had since, with not playing in the last couple of years, or playing not at the same level, maybe in the last couple of years, it's had, I think, drastic impact on women's tennis just automatically. The same way, I think, once the four eventually retire, the big four in tennis eventually retire on the men's circuit, it's going to take a hit on the men's tennis is going to take a hit as well. So we'll see how that goes. Maz, I'm going to hand it back to you. We're going on this path on looking at a couple of the sports. Maz, we want to talk a little bit about cricket. So you know a little bit about some of the work that's being done in the women's cricket, in the area of women's cricket. Can you talk a little bit about how they're dealing with some of the pay disparities on the women's cricket side?
Sure, Krishna. So we already mentioned how the BCCI has taken a huge initiative by linking sponsorships for women's cricket in India. It's clearly made a big difference. We're seeing Indian women's cricket become much more competitive. Still have ways to go. We struggled in the New Zealand series just now, but still I'm seeing a lot of progress, and they're good to watch. Honestly, the women's cricket in general is good to watch, especially Australia are so good. You see a few players here and there. New Zealand, Susie Bates is an absolute joy to watch. She wicketkeeper, batsman, just a monster.
In India, yeah, I can't wait to watch Anushka Sharma also. She's become a cricketer.
What?
She's doing a movie now. She's playing a cricketer.
Oh God, Jhulan Goswami. Oh, that trailer was that trailer was an embarrassment and like sad for Jhulan Goswami. She sounds nothing like that. They've given her this strong Bengali accent which she doesn't have. It's like racial profiling in a lot of ways. Trying to avoid any sort of controversy here, but my personal opinion.
Anyway, we need the controversy. Hopefully, we can tag on to all the people watching that trailer who can maybe come to this afterwards. So keep it going. We can add this in the clip at the start.
But coming back to it, women in BCCI is done. That's one thing. Women's cricket in general, ICC was generating a lot of views for the Women's World Cup. It's slowly going up. So I think cricket is on the right path. Pay is something that is being discussed, is being worked upon, but there are certain players who do earn well. Of course, because they've created their own brand of and so many other factors to it. But there's the Women's Big Bash League, which Australia created, Cricket Australia created. And what they did was they completely made it a separate entity. So even though they are all under Cricket Australia, it's their own brand. The Women's Big Bash League has their own title sponsor. It's not KFC. So it's Weber's, if I'm not wrong. So like they've taken that thing and they've created this own brand. The female cricketers also feel like they belong now in a lot of ways. The Big Bash has been doing well. Even the Women's Big Bash has been doing exceedingly well. It led to the 100 being created as England tries to rejuvenate cricket and create interest again, garner interest in the UK, in England and Wales. And the first season was a huge success. What happens is the women and men play on the same day and they're both telecasted on BBC. Sometimes they play on the same ground, so it's the women who will go first or the men. There's no sort of like order as such in terms of that. But so the final was played on the same day, for example. And what happened was there were 2.4 million viewers that tuned into the final of the 100. And 17,000 people watched the final of the women's game and 25,000 tuned in for the men's final, which was after that. So even though you may say that the men's game got more viewership, it's not necessarily the case. It's because it was also later in the day. So that evening time is something that generally people would prefer. So I think this speaks volumes of what they are doing. But the best thing about the 100 is that it's equal pay. So they're all getting paid by the ECB, the English Cricket Board, and it's all equal pay. So the winning team gets the same money, prize money, and so do the runners up, and so on and so forth. there are many other things coming in. They're looking for private investment to going forward potentially, and that might also change a lot. And they're just hoping one day. So BCCI has not allowed the male players to play for any other leagues, but the female players are there. So we have 5 players representing some of these some of these teams in the 100, including Harmanpreet Kaur and Smriti Mandhana, 2 superstars. So hopefully it'll increase viewership in India. They didn't have a deal for television rights here. You could only watch it on fan code through the app, but that was also premium. So fan code is owned by Dream Sports. For all of you who don't know, Dream 11, same owners. So
I am one of those all of us who did not know, by the way. I had no idea anyway.
yeah, but the point is, like, slowly that viewership might also increase if they can somehow figure out some rights with some media rights here in India and make it exclusive. Here I'm saying it like I'm there, so, like there in Gui's case. But the point is, it's moving in the right direction. I think a lot of sports can take a page out of cricket's book. Cricket's doing its best to anyway save test cricket as well. I'm not sure if the 100's the best method to do that, but at least it's fun. And I'm looking forward to watching the second season because I didn't watch the first, but I heard good things about it. So let's see. Shubham, you and I will go. Don't think the tickets will be too expensive, so we can definitely go.
Definitely.
To keep our viewers and listeners updated, Shubham has also joined the London crew, so he is now with Mazhar there. So we needed 2 correspondents because of all the stuff going on in the Premier League. So he's headed there to kind of support your EMEA function. But Maz, thanks for the update on that. Thanks also for the review of the Julan Goswami trailer. Much appreciated. Hopefully we can get some attention from there. We're going to go into the quiz. I just want to really quickly call out 2 other sports where women's sports are pretty big in. I'd say WNBA. The average salary for a WNBA player is about 120,000. The top earner in 2021 made 221,000. So that's about 100,000 more than the average. The highest earner is obviously not comparable in the men's circuit. It's like Steph Curry, who gets 45 million a year. So it's not comparable at all. But again, if we're being honest, viewership is also different. The interesting thing, though, is that they did find the viewership is actually on the incline for many, many WNBA teams. There is more and more viewership that's coming in. So that might generate a bit more in way of salary as well. Unfortunately, it's not converted to revenue as yet, because if you see a lot of the WNBA games, the production's actually pretty fantastic. It's pretty great. They're putting up games in a pretty good way. They're doing a good marketing and advertising campaign, but they're not as yet able to match the attention. So they're currently still making losses, but they're hoping to overcome that with attention from viewers. The last quick one is UFC, where we also see a big prevalence of female athletes. Obviously, the big names of Amanda Nunes and Ronda Rousey were the ones to generate a lot of attention, I think, for the sport, especially on the female side. They did find that in general, the highest female UFC salary in 2020 was approximately 450,000, which again is not going to be comparable to the highest earners in the men's side. In 2020, the highest earner was Zhang Wei Li. In 2020, the highest earner on the men's side was Khabib, who earned 6 million. So it's not really comparable again, side by side. Again, viewership is a little bit different, but that's another sport where women's athletes are really coming up and becoming really household names. If you follow mixed martial arts, it's one of those sports where really the women's athletes are as much of household names as you would say the men's athletes are, especially the bigger names. So there's a couple of the others where women's sports are pretty big. But with that, guys, let's get into the quiz. We technically started this round of quizzes a few episodes ago. I screwed up and gave away way too many points, essentially assuring my loss. So I was able to negotiate a new agreement by which we restart the quiz altogether. So that's what we're going to do now. A quick quiz round. It's going to be focused on women's sports, but I'm going to give a few options so that we make it a little bit easier. I'm going to start off with cricket. Guys, question number 1. Who won the last Women's World Cup? Mazhar, you seem to have the answer locked and loaded. So I'm going to not give it to you. because I think it's you for sure have it. I'll go to Malu first.
Save the just fastest fingers first, Krishna.
Okay, go for it,
Fastest-
boss. Go for it. You get it.
No, it's okay. It's okay. Let them go as well.
I'm guessing it was. I know, confused between India and Australia. India.
Okay. Gui.
Safe bet Australia.
Okay. Mazhar. Who was it?
It's
my man?
England. It's England. They beat us in the final. Which we should have won. We just panicked under pressure. We panicked under pressure.
Now I remember.
Should have won that.
Now I remember. Now that you say that we were there and we lost, I remember that there was a lot of
We just panicked. That
Consolation
we didn't
match.
have. We needed the female version of Dhoni at that point to drive us through, but never mind. They played amazingly in that tournament. They were really good, though. The female team, the women's team did really well.
Okay, so a follow-up to that. So India was in the final. You're absolutely right. It was England who won the last World Cup. India's in the final. India's actually never won it. But we have been runner-up. How many times has India been a runner-up in the Women's World Cup finals? And I'll hand it to the closest if no one gets the exact number, I'll give it to the person who's closest. Mazal, I'll go to you first this time since this one is not going to be as obvious.
I think I know 2 for sure. Was there a third though? I'm not even sure about 2 now that I think of it.
The way he has asked the question it sounds like that should be 10 or 11.
Okay, I'll go. How many women's World Cups have happened? If you can just tell me.
Ooh, that's a good question. I think there have been 11 totally. I might be wrong, but I think there have been 11 totally.
So I'm going with 3.
3, okay?
Yeah, I was thinking 3 only.
3, okay. Gui?
Now here's the catch. I was thinking 2, but if I don't say 3 and they turn out to be right, there's 3 points for everyone. The
Gui,
moment
go
I
with
say
my philosophy,
3,
bro. Always change up the answer. You may not get the points, but your
4.
pride is maintained. 4.
4.
Gui, wrong side. It's actually 2. You should have gone for 2. You should have won it. I thought you were going to go lower, man. Anyhow, the answer is 2.
Yeah, I had a feeling. I wasn't sure.
Was that you had it right? It was 2005 and then 2017 most recently. Okay, guys.
I am never taking your advice. Ever.
So we got 2 points.
Krishna's advice, you will end up with a punishment. As simple as that.
So we have 2 points for Mazhar, 1 point for Malu. Gui, sorry, sticking with the 0 as of now. Last question on women's cricket. Who has won the most World Cups in women's cricket? Gui going with Australia. Malu, what do you think? Or Mazhar, what are you thinking? I'll go to you first maybe on this one.
Australia.
Yeah, even I was going with Australia only.
Absolutely right. Australia with 6 World Cups.
6 World Cups, yeah.
Yep. So Gui, you're off the board. It's 1 point Gui, 2 points Malu, 3 points Maz. Let's switch sports a bit now. Let's move to tennis. So tennis is a little bit harder because I was looking at the ATP rankings, and ATP rankings really shift up a lot. Like they are super inconsistent. Ashley Barty is number 1. Who is number 2 right now in the WTA rankings? I'll go to you first. It is a known name. It's a known name. It's not a huge name, but it's a known name.
Oh my God. Is it Sabalenka?
So your answer is Sabalenka. Who are you thinking, Maz?
Oh, me? Oh, yeah, Sabalenka.
Okay. Malu?
First choice, Sabalenka.
Sabalenka. I would have done the same, Malu. I didn't know. I know like 3 people on this list. It is number 2, Sabalenka. Gui, right answer. I think the hint I'm hoping helped a little bit. So that takes you to 2 Gui, 3 Malu, Mazhar with a 4 over there. Okay, next up. I'm switching out of tennis because tennis became a little bit too hard for me. In the women's football circuit, we already spoke about how US absolutely dominates. They're number 1 by far. Can you name who is number 2 or 3? If you name one of them, I'll give it to you. They are both European countries.
I will go. It's between Netherlands and England.
Netherlands and England. Okay. Gui.
Oh. Oh, there's a very good shout for Spain though. But I'm so my if you am I supposed to name one?
No, you get two, and if you get even one of them, you just get only 1 point up for grabs. But if you get even one of them, I'll give it to you.
So I'm going between Netherlands and England. Yeah.
Okay.
Over.
Okay. Fair enough. Shubham, I'll switch it up a little bit. Who are you thinking?
See, England for sure, I think.
Okay.
And just because I have to select another country, and Gui was stressing on Spain, England and Spain, I guess.
Okay. Okay. Mazhar? It's a wry smile.
Germany is there. Germany is there for sure. But
Okay.
second one, you said both are European, right? So
But actually, the top five, barring your US, are all European.
okay, so that doesn't help. So I know Germany for sure. I'm going with Germany because I know they've been doing really well. And second one, I don't know, but I'll go with Netherlands.
Netherlands, pretty good shot. So Netherlands is fifth. It's actually Sweden and Germany. I was pretty surprised by this too. I thought as well it would be Netherlands and England. These are the current rankings. I have no idea what tournaments happened recently.
The Netherlands were runners-up in the World Cup. They
Yep.
won the European Championships the last time around.
Hey, bro, I don't know how the rankings
FIFA
systems
rankings
work, boss.
were,
I
yeah.
have no idea.
Belgium
man.
are still number one. Belgium are still number one.
Yeah.
In men's. So I mean,
I'm so mad right now.
Okay, follow up to that question is who won the FAWSL? So that's the equivalent of the Premier League, but for women's. Who won that? And I'll give you a hint. It's one of the top six. It's one of the top six.
that you didn't need the hint, Krishnan.
Yeah, I think you probably would have guessed that either way.
I'll go
Who's
last.
going?
I'll switch it up to
Chelsea.
Malu.
I know I'm thinking between Chelsea or City.
This guy's thinking is getting me panicky now.
10.
Okay, I'll just go with. Give two options here: Chelsea or City. Either one, whoever's correct, I get a point.
You know what? I'm not going with that. Only because I know I'll need points later. And Malu is usually the one guy I'm like relatively close to.
Oh God, this is hard. Chelsea.
Okay. Gui?
Chelsea.
Mazhar?
Chelsea, they
Oh.
just
Let's go.
lost.
Boys. Hey, he didn't say. I didn't say if it's right or not. Now we just
No,
assumed if Mazhar has
Right.
it. It's
Because when you asked the question, Mazhar was so confident, so I was like, okay, it has to be.
It
They
is
lost
Chelsea.
the Champions League final to Barca. They were too dominant. No one can beat this Chelsea women's team right now, it seems.
Last year. Now this year they can. Not to take
This year, yeah. Lots of teams have beaten them this year, to be fair.
Great job, guys. So 6, 4, 3. So 6 for Mazhar, 4 for Malu, 3 for Gui. As always, a lot of points on grabs. Last question, sealing the deal. 2 points up for grabs over here. 2 points not up for grabs. Only 1 point up for grabs. It's finishing off on women.
Someone has learned from his mistakes.
I'm finishing off. I thought I'd done with tennis, but I actually have one more tennis question in the bag, and I think we can all speak to this athlete. So in the Forbes 2020 list, one of the female athletes on there, I think she's one of the few, there aren't a whole lot, was Naomi Osaka. What were her 2020 earnings when she was on the Forbes list? Closest to wins. Closest to wins.
Give me who was on the top and how much they earned at least.
Okay,
I
just
have
say
no
the person above her earned how much.
Arey, pause 1 second. I have to go
that's
check
too
the
good.
list.
Tell me what is the max?
Okay, the max on the list? Okay, 1 sec.
Must be corner only, right?
Oh,
So
2020 corner, why? What did he do in 2020?
Arey, just his beer, his bloody whiskey brand only.
it's possible. So the cutoff to make the, I'll give you, this is the only hint I'm giving because this is the only thing I can find right now. So I'll give you a hint that Osaka is number 12. That's one hint. The second hint is that the cutoff to make the top 50 was 34 million.
My initial number was much below that, so thank you.
So the cutoff to make is 34 million. She's number 17. So closest to wins.
And this is top 100 list.
Top 100 list, correct. Oh, sorry. No, this is our top 50. Sorry. The cutoff to make the top 50 was 34.
Chala now, every question Mazhar can't go last. He goes first this time.
Mazhar, you go first this time, boss.
Arey, it's a numbers question. You go first or last, whatever it is.
It doesn't matter. I have no idea. So you said 30.
No,
was
no,
the
no, no.
cut.
Listen. It matters every time I answer first, and then these guys follow my answers, and they're getting the points. Hard for them also.
They did all steal your Chelsea answer. I completely agree with
exactly,
you.
exactly.
This is earnings through
2020, the year 2020.
no, but like that
Salary
includes
and
sponsors.
I think it includes
Salary
everything.
and endorsements.
I think it includes everything, including endorsements.
103.8 million.
103.8. Okay.
Malu, you go.
Malu, number
Gui.
Acha, I'll go conservative. 48 million.
48 million. Okay. Shubham Malu.
I'm not going to say anything which is going to help. Malu.
Initially I was thinking like some 15 or 20 million, but if 35 is a cutoff.
Yeah.
100 million, yeah, Mazhar, yeah. Don't you think that's a bit too much?
I'm not going to
It
say
is.
anything.
I don't care about
I've
it.
already felt too much.
Mazhar is still running away. He's like, chalega, apun to distance mein hai. He's like, what is it? Bolt, looking back and smiling.
I will go with 40 million.
40 million. So 40 million. Gui, what was yours? 48 million?
Yeah.
And Mazhar 100 million.
Mazhar is
Gui,
wrong.
Great job. Mazhar is wrong. 57.3 million. Good stuff, Gui. Good stuff. Very close, Malu. So Gui, you finish off tied with Malu at 4. Mazhar ahead with Mazhar at 7. You two tied at 5. Great stuff, boys. That's the end of the episode. Thank you everyone for listening, watching, however you did listen to this episode. Do leave us a like if you enjoyed this episode. Make sure to share it with anyone who's interested in these type of topics. We have an episode every single week, so we'll be back again next week with a whole nother episode. Stay safe. Have a great week. Thanks. If you like this episode, make sure to leave a like and share it with anyone else who might be interested. You can also subscribe on any social media platform that you prefer, and all our links are in the bio. We also have a website with all our episodes as well as blogs and a whole lot of other sports content, so make sure to check that out as well.